Good morning, everybody. This is Nevin Gusak, the host of the Politically Homeless podcast. With me is another recurring guest of mine, Charles Daniel, Putting Workers First and the Communications Workers of America. Charles, how you doing? And thanks for joining us this morning.
I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me. It is always a pleasure. Looking forward to getting a chance to talk and then later go back and look up all the big words that you use that I don't understand.
Nah, you use a lot of big words too, and you teach me a few things as well. But the most important thing is that we're giving a point of view that's not always provided through the news media, even on YouTube. So we're going to take advantage of our freedom of speech, and we're going to discuss some very important topics like we usually do. Charles, could you give the audience a background of your work that you do at the CWA, your official titles, what Putting Workers First is about?
Yeah, I've been a union member for over 20 years now. That being with the Communications Workers of America, working in the telco field. I became a local president back in 2014, 2015, and then I went to staff with District 4 about a year and a half ago. And maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, I had frustrations about things that were happening outside of my purview, really, that were still labor related. And I was like, I'd really like to be able to talk about these things, but I don't have a platform right now. So I started Putting Workers First, just so I could have a place to talk about what was going on in the labor world, because it's a ripple effect, right? All those small things impact us. Those judges that are appointed, the laws that are being made, they all affected my members, and I wanted to be able to focus on them in an arena that made sense. So I started a Facebook group, which turned into Twitter and my website. And all I do every day when I wake up, Nevin, is try to do things to help workers. And that's what Putting Workers First is about. It's about putting the power back in the hands of workers. Because I think when workers succeed, the entire country prospers.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. And you had brought up in an offline conversation that you suggested that our next topic should be or could be about President Franklin Roosevelt and how, on a domestic level, that he saved this country from communism. Now, from my point of view, with Roosevelt, with Franklin Roosevelt, he actually did save this country domestically from a fascist, pro-Axis, or communist takeover in the country. I don't think there's any doubt about that. The right wing is partially correct in the sense that, yes, the New Deal administration was initially penetrated by the Communist Party USA and Soviet agents, but they never considered Roosevelt one of their own. We're going to get into that in our discussion. That's part that they leave out somewhat. And in fact, the Communist Party USA up until about 1935, 1936 hated, and I mean hated, the New Deal. And the pro-Axis fascists, well, they believed that the New Deal, along with, of course, the Nazi Party in Germany, which was ruling then, they felt that the New Deal was a tool of the international bankers and Jews, that it didn't go far in really solving the problems of capitalism. This is the Nazis and their supporters of the United States. And then through the other mouth, the Nazis would also say that it also was a form of Bolshevism, of communism, the New Deal. So they attacked the New Deal from multiple sides too, as well, to weaken the United States. Franklin Roosevelt, I think one of the biggest sins of his administration, I'm just putting my view on Roosevelt out, was the recognition of the Soviet Union and further increasing trade between American corporations and the Soviet Union. That was a huge mistake, beyond, I don't want to say catastrophic proportions, but it was really a black mark against him. But when it came to constructing the New Deal, the various laws that the Congress had passed, like Glass-Steagall, like the Uptick Rule, like the Communications Act, like other laws that were that regulated or controlled speculative forms of finance, aspects of like the Public Works Administration and the Works Progress Administration, Civilian Conservation Corps, the Social Security Act, the National Labor Relations Act, which needs an upgrade, obviously, I think in both of our opinions. All of these saved capitalism. All of those policies and laws saved and stabilized capitalism. And we're going to talk about how Roosevelt that was really Roosevelt's intention, because the threat of a communist takeover or a fascist pro-Axis takeover was very real in the United States. What are your thoughts about that? What things fascinate you about Roosevelt, and what are the things you agree or disagree with Roosevelt? I gave my nutshell. Now you can give yours.
Yes, and just what you went through there just shows the scope of what he was dealing with. So I know it's very challenging just being right like friggin' half the time with some of the stuff when you're looking back. So the fact that he got so much right is really a testament to him. Um, Communism, capitalism, socialism, like none of it really terrifies me all that much because I think ideas are something that shouldn't be taboo and we should be able to talk about those things. And for me, I mean, we talked before, just I consider myself very pragmatic on these things. And I think there's good pieces to everything. And you take all of those things and you find what works and you figure out what works through doing. And that's what I like about what FDR did is the proof of the pudding is in the eating. When you look at what happened going in the 20s, they called them roaring 20s because everything was rolling, right? And things were never going to go bad. If you put your money in the stock market, you couldn't go wrong. And you elect Hoover, who is this, pro business, commerce guy. And man, this guy is really going to set the country straight. And then when the bottom falls out, it turns out, oh shit, you can't actually save a country. A government is not a business. You try to run the government like a business, it will crush the people. And we're a government made up by the people for the people. So looking at the way that FDR was able to come in, implement programs that helped people, and by helping the people help the country shows to me that that's why I believe that when you help the people at the bottom, you grow the economy from the bottom up and the middle out as opposed from the top down. And I think the fact that he was able to turn things around to the point that the next, goodness, 40 plus years, everything ran pretty friggin' well is a testament to his ideas and that they actually work in practice.
And I'm looking through some of these notes for essays that eventually I plan on writing. When I go on my trip, I'm taking my laptop, so I'm actually going to start actually kind of gelling it together. And I notice about the 1920s, you mentioned the roaring 1920s, and I look at all the things that the historians have written, and it's just like today's world. That's what's interesting. The parallels are unbelievable. For example, Jonathan Levy wrote initially at the birth of mass production, industrial corporate profits ran far ahead of wages. Sound familiar, Charles? Working people did not participate in the 1920s speculative investment boom. Boy, is this sounding familiar? Increasing economic inequality put more money in the hands of the wealthy who kept bidding up stock prices, increasing their incomes from asset price appreciation leveraged by credit, while labor incomes at the bottom of the distribution stagnated. So, unbelievable. Eric Girding wrote, the 1920s witnessed a relaxation of antitrust laws, deregulation of the banking industry, and a laissez-faire approach towards securities markets, including burgeoning margin loans for stock speculation. And Joseph Shannon wrote, the lessons from the deregulation of the 1920s were lost or ignored. Forgotten was the role of financial laissez-faire in promoting speculation and leverage with little protection for small investors. And compared to the majority investors, I have a decent amount of money in the stock market, but I would be considered still, by the majority shareholders, I would be considered a small investor. So, and before I read some statements by extremist politicians at the time in the 1920s, does this sound familiar, Charles? Does this seem like what's going on today?
You're reading my mind. This is actually something that I talked about quite a bit during the Trump administration because it's always the same idea that we're going to cut taxes on the people that are the richest, and that's going to trickle down, right? And it's going to end up helping everyone. But it never friggin' works. We have seen it fail over and over again. And it feels like Lucy holding the football for Charlie Brown, telling her, don't worry, everything's going to be fine this time. And the problem is that when you cut regulations and you cut taxes for those people, that there's an immediate spike. and everything goes up. Just like if you have a campfire and you take a gallon of gasoline and pour it on there, yeah, it's going to burn like crazy, but that fuel gets burned up immediately, and there is a drop off afterwards, especially if you don't have the kindling, the wood, to actually sustain the fire. And that's what cutting taxes is. It goes up like this, and then it immediately falls off. And unfortunately, the people at the bottom are the ones that bear that weight, and it happens over and over and over again. I tell people all the time, what's happening to us now, it's new to us, it's not new.
It really is not, and I'm glad you mentioned that. And one of the things that FDR did that I totally agree with was also the banning of stock buybacks, which unfortunately President Reagan in 1982, and his SEC chairperson at the time, John Shad, was also a Wall Street banker. Look, I don't think Wall Street is like a totally evil institution. I don't think I certainly wouldn't abolish it, but I think it needs to be much more tightly regulated. You can cut taxes on the quote unquote rich, but you have to have the certain tax, trade, immigration, labor, and banking and financial incentives that redirects that investment purposely and only towards production in new plants and new facilities in the United States and paying higher wages. You and I are not suggesting that everybody should be equal and there should be a leveling. Sometimes one of my guests who I interview on geopolitics was an excellent guest, and he's a friend, but him and I have running disagreements on core economic policies and certain core values in general. And very, very erudite gentleman. I mean, he's not an anarcho-capitalist, that's for sure. But he said, are you for just equalizing everybody? I said, absolutely. He said you can't get perfect equality, or, and of course there's always going to be a natural inequality, but you have to kind of soften the edges of it. Why? Well, there are many different reasons why. Number one, it's not a sustainable economy. You have a situation, as you just pointed out, where the super wealthy get even more wealth. But unfortunately, what happens is the bottom doesn't share really much of the pie, and they have to struggle. And that's ultimately a drag on the economy. And not only is that, in my opinion, not good economics, I happen to believe, like I believe you believe, Charles, in demand side economics, very similar to what, for example, the multi-billionaire businessman who is also a reform capitalist like myself, Nick Hanauer, argues middle out economics or bottom up economics. And that's what I believe. Because if more people like us have more money in our pockets, that means the rich are still going to get richer. And that's why the fascists and communists hate people like me, and I'm sure you, because we want to ultimately improve the system. The right hates us, I would argue, is because they either confuse or misunderstand our intentions, or like the communist leadership or the fascist or neo-Nazi leadership, they're bad people. I mean, these are people that believe in inequality, and they're basically misanthropic economic elitists, or what FDR referred to as economic royalists. Now, I'm going to read some quotes from the 1920s. And again, let's see if there's some parallels today. Hiram Evans, this is during the 1920s. Hiram Evans, the imperial wizard of the Ku Klux Klan from 1922 to 1939, admitted, there has been a widespread feeling among Klansmen that in the last few years, the operation of the national government has shown weakness, indicating a possible need for rather fundamental reform. In a 1923 letter written by a Klan opponent to the editor of the New Republic, which was a left progressive magazine at the time, it's moved more to the right by about the late 1970s, claimed, first, throughout all classes, there is a growing skepticism of democracy, especially of the current American brand. This is 1923, roaring 20s. Many Americans believe there is little even-handed justice administered in the courts, that a poor man has a little chance against a rich one, that many judges practically buy their places on the bench. Hello, Clarence Thomas, or are put there by powerful interests. Hello, Federalist Society. The strong, able young man comes out of college ready to do his part in politics, but with the settled conviction that unless he can give full time there is no use bucking up against the machine. Furthermore, He believes the machines to be equally corrupt. The miner in West Virginia sees the power of the state enlisted on the side of the mine owner. Wow, that sounds just like almost verbatim what's going on today, doesn't it? The conditions, where to the point where, I mean, look, it pains me to say this. It's like hands and fingers on the chalkboard going when I say this. But that letter to the New Republic is correct. And the Klan leader, Hiram Evans, is correct, even though he's an asshole on his ultimate vision, and I'm going to curse, is right. So what the bleepity bleep kind of world is it where the right wing and the trickle downers of the 1920s are wrong in many ways and screwing things up in the long term, but yet the enemies of democracy have a little whiff of truthfulness? I don't want to be put in that position. What's wrong with this? Picture is like topsy-turvy. My mind's getting confused. Could you make sense out of this, Charles?
Dude, this is exactly what we talk about all the time is politics is so tribal that you have these beliefs that are ascribed to a certain group and these beliefs that are given to the other group. And it's not a I can see what's good over here and I can see what's good over here and come let us reason together, which is a very biblical thing to talk about. But instead it's I believe this and I believe this. And Nevin, what I believe is that I just want there to be a fair fight out there. We had some legislation up here in Michigan that we were trying to get passed for call center workers, where if they were eliminating a call center in Michigan and sending those jobs out of the country, not even out of the state, but straight up out of the country, that those corporations wouldn't be eligible for federal loans and grants from the state because those comes from taxpayers, right? And if you ask a taxpayer, hey, they're going to close down a call center in Flint and send it to Bangladesh, do you think that company should still be able to receive your tax dollars? No. 99 out of 100 people, if you talk to them, will say no. But when I was sitting there in a committee hearing, talking to these legislators on the labor committee about it, there were folks on the right-hand side that were against it because there shouldn't be regulations on business and they shouldn't be able to put their thumb on the scale and they believed in a free market economy. And I was like, you got to be friggin' kidding me. It is already so rigged. They've had their thumb on the scale for the past 50 years. If you give a little bit of boost to the other side, you're not tipping the scale. You're trying to just crank it back a little bit towards fair. When we talked about the stock buybacks, right? Tell me who that's benefiting. All that it's doing is creating artificial scarcity. It's not real. You're not investing in R&D. They're not investing in their workforce. They're not moving things forward. They're not making the world a better place. All they're doing is buying up their own resources to artificially push up their prices. And we see what happens with that over and over again. It'll get to the bubbling point. It'll crack, the levee will burst, the people at the bottom will suffer, and the people at the top will declare bankruptcy and float away. And they'll get bailed out by socialism every single time. They're all against helping people out at the bottom when these corporations, these banks go bust. Oh, they're too big to fail. We got to help them. Let's be consistent about these things. Let's exercise some just common sense, for crying out loud.
Yeah, no, it's unbelievable. You know, it's funny, and you mentioned this. I'm bringing back, of course, the 1920s and 1930s and setting ourselves up for Roosevelt. It was Herbert Hoover who wrote, and this is while he was president, in early 1932, he said, men are not justified in deliberately making a profit from the losses of other people. So even Hoover, even though he didn't put it fully in policy, was starting to see it. In fact, Hoover also observed to columnist Mark Sullivan, the only trouble with capitalism is capitalists. They're too damn greedy. And one of my friends, who's one of the board member of our local Friends of the Library, I'm the manager, for those of you who don't know it, the Lauderhill Central Park Library in Lauderhill down in South Florida. And one of our friends' board members, his name is Ira, who eventually I'm going to be having on this program. He was a freelance writer. He's my kind of Democrat, real good. And he actually told me that quote, the latter quote about that Hoover stated, the only trouble with capitalism and capitalists are too damn greedy. And that's true. And then what happens is then it makes people like the Klan and the communists and the German American Bund and Father Coughlin's National Union of Social Justice and Huey Long it makes them look like the sensible people, and the advocates of this hyper rugged individualism and economic social Darwinism look very cruel and insensitive and unpatriotic and the whole 9 yards. And that's a very dangerous situation to get us into. So now when we get to Roosevelt, now you talk about regulations, you're talking about the bubbles, about the stock buybacks. I'm looking here. The National Bureau of Economic Research reported that the United States, quote, experienced 33 major economic downturns, which impacted roughly 60 of the years in questions. These included 22 recessions, 4 depressions, and 7 economic panics, bank runs, and failures. That was before the New Deal, okay? You want that? So and take a look at these statistics here, and then you'll comment on it. And I'm sorry to keep on talking, but this is important facts to get lost in right-wing, so-called right-wing, plutocratic, oligarch radio and propaganda and whatnot, unfortunately. But between 1934 and 1941, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, managed only 370 bank failures thanks to the New Deal era bank regulations. The GDP rose throughout FDR's first 2 terms, except for the period 1937 to 1938. Average growth rates range from 8 to 10%. According to political scientist Larry Bartels, in the 1936 election, FDR did best in, quote, the states that happened to enjoy robust economic growth in the months leading up to the vote. While there was some improvement in private sector employment under the New Deal, citizens who work for New Deal agencies and programs such as the Works Progress Administration were incorrectly counted as unemployed. When you listen to the free market critics of the New Deal, they will say employment did not increase under FDR's New Deal. In fact, it decreased or was made worse. However, they never included they don't include the new employment statistics and jobs created by all these New Deal agencies, the Public Works and Civilian Conservation Corps. According to Rauschway, the WPA, PWA, and the Tennessee Valley Authority, quote, modernized the South and West and created the infrastructure that permitted the wartime and post-war prosperity. And if you wanted to know more about punching holes kind of in the libertarian and Reaganomics type of criticisms of the New Deal, there's in Dissent magazine, winter 2010, New Deal Denialism by Eric Rauschway. So reading through that, what are your thoughts, Charles, with all those statistics I read about new employment, less bank failures? Does this seem like Franklin Roosevelt is a Bolshevik or a fascist, or is he actually saving the system?
I think figures lie and liars figure. It's really hard sometimes when you're debating these things and talking to people with opposing viewpoints to figure out the knife from the wound, right? And one of the things we were talking about before we started was just cost of living, right? Just inflation, the fact that things are going up. But man, worse than inflation is deflation, which is what they experienced back then, which can really drop the bottom out of the economy. And one of the things that I try to be cognizant of as well is if you look back to the Reagan times, which a lot of these folks will tell you is when America was great, look at the inflation numbers back then. Look at the mortgage rates back then, the interest rates back then, than they are now. But for some reason, they see it through these rose-colored glasses in the past. And you start thinking about why that is. And it's really because they just don't like the person that's in charge, because it goes back to those tribal group politics. Again, they are actively rooting for failure, right? Because then they get to be right, then they get to have their person. And you know what? If my person's in there and they cut taxes and the rich people get super rich and I get a small piece of this, and later down the road it falls the bottom out, you know what? I don't worry about those things. So I try super hard to to not have cognitive dissonance on these things and to be able to be critical of the people that are on my team, right? When Tommy Tuberville does insider trading with stock manipulation, it's wrong. When Nancy Pelosi does it, it's just as wrong. We have to have common rules for common people, because you know what? They're not my friends, Nevin. They're not my friends. They're my employees. And if my employees are stealing from me, I need to have a difficult conversation with them.
Exactly. Exactly. No doubt about it. I mean, it's you and I are like brothers of the same mind when it comes to especially domestic policy. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Now, when we take a look at the radical left, the communists and whatnot, our friend Ira had mentioned some very interesting facts, but before we get into that, I mean, here's some more things that I read. During the Depression, you had extremists. You had people who are normally supporters of the free enterprise system becoming radicalized. But then you had politicians who I consider extremists, like Governor Theodore Bilbo, who was an arch segregationist, racist, and populist from Mississippi, hugely anti-black and anti-Jewish too, to boot. And he was a supporter of the New Deal, at least in its early phases. But he said, and during the Great Depression pre-Roosevelt, folks are restless. Communism is gaining a foothold. In fact, I'm getting a little pink myself. A.N. Young, the president of the Farmers Union of Wisconsin, stated, the farmer is naturally a conservative individual, but you cannot find a conservative farmer today. I am as conservative as any man could be, but any economic system that has in its power to set me and my wife in the street at my age, what can I see but red, meaning communist revolution. When you just take a look at all these different things, you had the communist movement. This is what Ira told me, and he's an educated man. He was a freelance writer from New York originally. And I started to do some digging because what he said was fascinating. The free market austerity policies during part of the Depression under Hoover, yes, he had the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, but much of the benefits of that tax money went to not the people, but it went to banks and industry and other capitalists and whatnot. That's where the bulk of that money went. And it was not improving things for the people, unfortunately. And the communists saw that. The communists saw that the people were not getting relief. The communists were penetrating the bonus army. They were helping the people. Then when people were thrown out of the streets from being evicted from their homes and their apartments, communists would be in full force, and they would bring all the furniture right back after they were evicted by the police. There were strikes. Their numbers were increasing. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And CPUSA leaders, Communist Party USA leaders, told their members to vote for the Republican Herbert Hoover in 1932, and even if they could, to disguise themselves as Republicans and volunteer to re-elect Hoover. The CPUSA leadership were convinced correctly that a re-elected Hoover, his policies of austerity for the poor and middle class, result in either a pro-fascist or communist revolution in the United States. And this was corroborated. Lincoln Steffens, who was the left-wing populist muckraking journalist who was an admirer of Lenin and Mussolini, urged Americans to vote for Herbert Hoover and not FDR. And Charles, you're looking at me like, what the F is that? Because I got to try and be family friendly here. Well, that was from the Daily Kos, not exactly a right-wing site, and Justin Kaplan's biography on Lincoln Steffens. Why would they do that? This is the tactic and strategy, really, of accelerationism. The more things get worse, the better. And then when Franklin Roosevelt became, and I'm sorry if I'm monopolizing, I know this is conversation, but this is important information you're not going to hear. This is a hardline anti-communist like you and me, and especially me, and you're an anti-communist too, but I will speak for myself, and I'm very hardline. You're not going to hear this on any hardline anti-communist program. This is to them history that doesn't exist, or they're not aware of. So when we look at what they said about the New Deal, the Democratic Socialists of America reprinted a Socialist Party article on FDR. So the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, its Chicago chapter, claimed there is nothing socialist about trying to regulate or reform Wall Street. Socialism wants to abolish the system of which Wall Street is an appropriate expression, which I don't agree with. I don't agree with abolishing Wall Street. There is nothing socialist about trying to break up great holding companies. We socialists prefer to acquire holding companies in order to socialize the utilities now subject to them. That's what DSA, which is an organization that is growing in size for years now, which has a nice size imprint within the Democratic Party. And so they're not considering FDR a socialist. Okay, that's what did they say then? I mean, Norman Thomas of the Socialist Party in the Anti-New Deal pamphlet in 1936, he said that calling the New Deal socialism was a false charge and a, quote, amazingly bad imitation of the Socialist Party platform. He wrote that FDR, quote, did not carry out the socialist platform unless he carried it out on a stretcher. You got to admire his humor there. When you look at the Communist Party USA was growing. It had the Socialist Party went from membership 15,000 in 1929 to 25,000 in 1935. It garnered 267,000 votes in the 1928 presidential election and 900,000 votes in the 1932 presidential election. By 1939, the CPUSA retained 80 to 90,000 members. The Voice of Action, which was of this Communist Party USA, wrote on August 7, 1933, it fumed. Since taking the oath of office, there has been a continuous evasion of doing anything for the working class. Instead, the bankers were provided for first. When the banking holiday, which was one of Roosevelt's early policies, was declared, huge loans, gifts were made to the railroads and big business. A military system of forced labor camps was instituted in the form of civilian conservation corps under the original name of Federal Unemployed Reserves, and now there has been enacted the National Industrial Recovery Act, giving to the president all the powers of a dictator. So the commies hated him at first. I.F. Stone, who was later found to be a journalist that received payments from the Soviet Union, and he was a communist, he wrote that Roosevelt's policies can be welded into a consistent whole only on the basis of one hypothesis, that Mr. Roosevelt intends to move towards fascism. Okay? I mean, this is what we're dealing with. The testimony of William Wirt, who was privy of conversations of underground communists buried in New Deal agencies, and the right wing likes to, and correctly, cite his testimony. What the communists call, like Alice Barrows and others embedded in the New Deal agencies, they said, only that FDR is only the Kerensky of this revolution. Not one of us, but an enemy of the revolution, because Alexander Kerensky was a moderate center leftist by today's standards in Russia, who is the head of the provisional government, the prime minister. Basically just to be used and just thrown out. They claimed, the communists in the New Deal, that FDR was not one of us, only the Kerensky of this revolution. We are the inside. We can control the avenues of influence. We can make the president believe that he's making decisions himself. Again, that he's an enemy, He's not one of us. And the Reds viewed Social Security and all of these reforms, Charles, as frauds, as scams. And I can go on and on and on. But what did Roosevelt really want? Well, and I'm going to close out with this statement. I apologize for speaking a lot. Again, this is very important information. I hope you're not mad at me. He said in an interview with Emil Ludwig, FDR stated that his, quote, political motive was his, quote, desire to obviate revolution. I work in a contrary sense to Rome, meaning Mussolini's fascism, and Moscow, meaning Stalin's communism. Okay, enough talking. I know I've said a lot. Are you surprised by any of this information?
Dude, that's a lot to unpack. I should have been taking notes. So here's what I know. When someone is drowning, they will reach out for help regardless of who is providing it. And when people are suffering and things are bad, change becomes something that sounds like a good idea, right? A. Philip Randolph, the president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, one of my personal heroes, loved the man. He was a communist, right? So I don't have any real issues with communism. I don't think you've actually seen true communism more than I think that America is really capitalist. I think that these are words that we use to describe a system that's really fluid. And I worry more about just manipulation and greed, which is what we talked about earlier. And the putting yourself up by pushing other people's down. That's where I run into issue. Well, we were talking about the farmers, right? And the populist movement back in the late 1800s, starting 1900s, the farmers revolt right there, where things were bad for them. And what they did is they came together and they worked together to try to improve all of their lives. And the way they did that was through solidarity. And time again, you see that when we all do better, we all do better. And we stick together, we get a bigger voice. And you look at companies, and what do they all do, Nevin? They go and join chambers of commerces to do the exact same thing, to benefit themselves in a social arrangement with all these other groups. But when they do it, it's not communism, it's not socialism, it's capitalism. It's the exact same thing. It's people coming together to increase their power. The difference being that those companies are trying to hold down people while those people are just trying to push themselves up. And I don't really have a problem with companies getting the press against them in the way that I do that people getting the press against them from companies, because I'm pro-person. As a member of the human race, I think that we should be the ones that are prioritized. And it's frustrating to me in a society that's seen so much advancement that when it comes to workers and you start talking about productivity increasing 400% since the 20s that we're talking about, but for some reason trying to make the work week go from 40 to 32 hours, oh my goodness gracious, people act like you're trying to overthrow the country. And that's why I try to stay away from using the word communist or capitalist. I almost never share that kind of content because I think that when you say those words, people's brains turn off. And they're used in the pejorative sense, and they're used to insult people. And I don't think that you can have reasonable conversations with not with you, but with the overwhelming majority of people that aren't really erudite in the way that they think about these things, and kind of have like a Dunning-Kruger effect going on, where they don't really know the ins and outs, the facts and figures to support their points of view. And when they use those words, it's to insult people and to hold them down. So just for me, I just try to stay away from them. I like that FDR wasn't anti-America. He knew that the theory and the experiment of America was right, but it was being corrupted by these greedy one percenters that were taking more than their fair share. And because of it, it was bankrupting the country. He said, you know what? If we all do better, we can all do better. And that doesn't mean that people can't be rich. They were still rich, Nevin. They were still opulently rich. The difference being that they weren't on their way to making trillions and trillions of dollars. I can't wrap my brain around that. I'm not a fan of billionaires. I don't care what kind of billionaire you are. I don't think that you can make that much money without the exploitation of someone else. That's just my personal point of view. And I have a personal theory as well that I don't spend a second of my day feeling bad for the rich and not a moment of my time being angry at the poor. And that's just where I'm at.
Yeah, and I look, you could take more time to talk if you want because I talk so much, but no, I mean, I agree with at least half of what you said. Now, the reason why, I speak about communism, capitalism, there are serious challenges to the different ideas. In fact, as Herbert Hoover said, the problem with capitalism is a part of the capitalists are very greedy, and that undermines the system. And to me, that's a problem because what can come out of that is something even infinitely worse. I would argue that plutocracy is the halfway house to Marxism, Leninism, or fascism, or socialism, potentially. The other reason I'm reading all this stuff online, and I know it might seem, like a lot. I know it isn't to you. You're fascinated by history, just like I am, is I'm trying to reach out to a portion of the right wing, even if I win a few of them, that are trying to get them rethink based on the facts that everything is not totally black and white when it comes to history. You probably have heard the charge that FDR is a communist. Well, when you look at the domestic record, it's very clear that he was not. I mean, he said and told a journalist in early 1935, I am fighting communism, Huey Longism, and Coghlinism, meaning the ideology of Father Coughlin, which was a form of populistic fascism. Um, Secretary of the Interior Harold Hicks of FDR's administration correctly noted in 1934, the country is much more radical than the administration. FDR admitted that according to FDR's son, Elliott, the second wave of New Deal reforms was, quote, designed to cut the ground from under the demagogues. And FDR himself admitted that to save our system, we save our system, the capitalist system, from crackpot ideas. And he has to save crackpot ideas, meaning fascism and communism. So I'm trying to break the right wing, and frankly, of the guests, you're the one that is more understanding, I think, on this issue. No disrespect to anybody else, just the facts of the facts. The anti-communists need to hear this. They need to go by the facts and say, you know what? Calling balls and strikes, Roosevelt was really wrong on that. He effed up on that. But oh, the New Deal. Wow, he said all this? I didn't know this. I didn't hear this on Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck didn't put that on his blackboard. That's what I'm trying to do. And you're right. A lot of people, when you talk about capitalism or communism, yes, people's eyes will glaze over or they'll see red. It's like a matador at the bull ring in Spain. But I would argue these things need to be discussed, and the history needs to be discussed, and really have more of a good faith general discussion. It's one of the many reasons why I've rejected the free market libertarian economic approach in Reaganomics, because they're not telling the truth, obviously. With all the facts that we've read already, obviously they have not told the truth. And I've gone over why I've rejected Reaganomics to a large degree and free market libertarianism. I'm not going to use this show to do that, but this is the issue. When I look at communists, are any of them heroes of mine? I would not say so. Although I thought A. Philip Randolph was a leftist, but I thought he was an anti-communist at least later in life. And sometimes that's what happens, is you have a number of heroes of mine that started out as communists who turned anti-communist, very anti-communist, but they always remain social reformists in some form or another, like James Burnham, like Sidney Hook, to give you two examples. And I'm a social reformist, because I want to improve the system. It's for America I'm doing it. You ever hear of Roosevelt's, I'm sure you've heard of Roosevelt's Second Bill of Rights?
Sure, the Workers' Bill of Rights?
Yeah, correct. I think that should be part of the Constitution in some form. I think many of the country's problems, in addition to the wonderful political rights and social rights, or really political rights that were given in our Constitution, particularly our Bill of Rights, I should say, of the Constitution, we need also certain core economic rights. We need set in the Constitution certain standards of conduct for business and labor to act accordingly. And there needs to be a national consensus, because this notion of we pass laws under the New Deal, then starting in the late 1970s, it get eroded by successive Congresses, presidential administrations, and the Supreme Court, which, by the way, Supreme Court in 1978 watered down and basically struck as illegal state anti-usury laws. And anti-usury laws used to be in existence from this country's early founding on a state level, and those have been undermined. So this is why, in order to settle these issues, the social question once and for all, we need to enact the Second Bill of Rights. Because the Second Bill of Rights, when you read through it, it's not, and again, I know you might not like this because of other people. You get the trolls on your Facebook page for putting workers first. I get that. I'm not one of these people. I might be just as anti-communist, maybe more anti-communist, because I bet those effers have no problem doing business with communist China or Putin's Russia or Castro or Diaz-Canal's Cuba. I bet they don't have a problem with that. I do. But I also am for social reforms to save the system. And that's the thing. So I have some moral authority, not to sound arrogant, but I am secure in and confident in my belief. I have a level of moral authority to comment on this. And when you look at the Second Bill of Rights, and we're going to take a look at it, and then you'll comment on the Second Bill of Rights and, what your thoughts are. But it really improves the system. The right to a
hey, Nevin, before you read it, I just wanted to say that, like, you're having very nuanced, learned conversations on this stuff, where I'm sharing memes on the internet, right? So these guys will attack you for certain things, and like I've shared stuff before. It's like anything that helps someone else is communist, right? That these are just words that are thrown around, and I've been called a Nazi, and I've been called communist, and I swear, man, it happens all the time. It's very interesting, and it's frustrating to me
because I'm going to go attack mode. Tag me.
Yes, because it doesn't have to be that if we can disagree without being disagreeable on some of these things. And I think that a lot of things become off limits to talk about, and that's frustrating for me. So I'm not trying to attack any of your points of view. I'm just saying that we approach it in different ways, right?
Oh yeah, that's fine. I don't take it personally at all. You've not been nothing but respectful to me. I'm sure I know I'm respectful to you. I think you do amazing work. There's no question about it. I agree with you. Do I think all billionaires, by the way, should be abolished? No, but I don't think billionaires should profiteer and get their money solely by exploitative business models, and things of that nature. Becoming a billionaire through playing the market, through stock buybacks if you're a majority shareholder, or private equity, which is taking over even the medical products industry. Like, I'm sure you saw the news about the wheelchair industry and wheelchair repair industry, where they're totally screwing that up too. When it's things like becoming a billionaire through private equity, for example, or the Walmart business model or the Amazon business model of labor exploitation or manipulation of the market, I'm not for that. That type of money making needs to be either controlled and regulated, if not outrightly abolished. It's okay to outlaw certain business practices. We've done that in this country. Anti-usury laws, the ban on stock buybacks, for example. I look at the economy very similar to Nick Hanauer, who is one of those billionaires, who's a social reformer but a believer in capitalism. The proprietor of Pitchfork Economics podcast, which I highly recommend. I think you would like it, Charles.
Yeah, they're great. Yeah, I share their content sometimes.
And, I agree with him. Each economic sector is of equal importance. You have the business person, investor, you have the communities, you have the consumers, you have the employees, you have of all types, you have probably other economic sectors I'm leaving out. It all operates like an organism, like cells connected together in the human body or an animal's body, working ideally in unison. And when some cells are unhealthy, you have to fix it. You have to sometimes cut it out if it's bad business practices, and you cut out that tissue, or you heal it. By nutritious eating, by medicines, by other improvements. Well, that's how I look at how economic policy and political reform should be undertaken. My type of radical civic nationalism is one of a nation's continuous improvement. So I see the Second Bill of Rights, which was one of would have been argued possibly law had Roosevelt not passed away in 1945. And he talks about the right to a useful and remunerative job in the industries or shops or farms or mines of the nation. The right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing and recreation. That I totally agree. The right of every farmer to raise and sell his products at a return which will give him and his family a decent living. Totally agree with that, particularly the small farmers, the family farmers. The right of every businessman, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom. Well, holy golly gee. Does that sound like communism or socialism to you? From unfair competition and domination by monopolies at home or abroad. Oh my God, home or abroad. Well, I wish Roosevelt was around because America has been a victim of foreign dumping by state monopolies in China and previously Russia, and even so-called allied countries in Asia that have very much statist, mercantilist economies like South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, etc. The right of every family to a decent home. Wow, sounds like family values made real, Charles. The right to adequate medical care and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health. Wow, that sounds pro-life, Charles, doesn't it? The right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment, and the right to a good education. Well, that sounds like a heavy dose of capitalism and social democracy, but not communism. And not socialism, let's confiscate the means of production and distribution and communication. And it doesn't sound like fascism where, yeah, you have private property on paper, but it's all state control of everything to the point when you need to use the bathroom. So does this sound like unreasonable? We could tweak this for today's world. I'd love for this to be as part of our Constitution.
It looks like a level playing field where you have the ability for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We were talking about what's going on with Mercedes and the UAW. There are two non-union Mercedes plants in the entire world, and they're in the United States. Both of them. Everywhere else, they're union, and it's no problem, and everything works, and they make a profit, and everything's good, and it's fine. But for some reason here, it's an issue because they're exploiting the shit out of our workers. And folks should stop being tired of being exploited. And people use scare words against you to keep you from getting yourself up. There's so much fear that's put out there that, oh my goodness, this is going to happen if we do that, and that's going to happen, and it's a slippery slope. And it's not. These things are successful in other places. FDR's a quote when he came to office, the big one, right? His first big speech after country. The only thing that we have to fear is fear itself. We can't be afraid to talk about ideas and to see, and even if they're uncomfortable topics, as long as it's about doing what's best for everyone. We're a society. We have to work together. You cannot benefit the few at the expense of the many. That's just common sense, man.
Yeah, and look, I know I'm hyper fixated on this topic. It's a topic that's not talked about, what you and I have talked about enough, particularly in a space where, look, my political roots are conservative. And look, I'm going to make a full confession. I was so conservative that I joined the John Birch Society in the 1990s. I know your eyes just widened. You're shocked about that. We could do it. Look, and they're not bad. The chapter I was involved with, they're not bad people. They're not racist. I didn't encounter racism, anti-Semitism, or anything like that. I do have core disagreements with them at this point, and agreement on certain things with them on other issues. But and I've met some of their writers and stuff. I mean, they're nice people. They're smart. They have their particular set of ideology and whatnot. But look, I was a Bircher. I've worked as a campaign worker, one of many, for Lieutenant Colonel Allen West. Mike Lemire, who was more of a populist Republican who was running for state Senate. I was an active Republican voter. I still am a technically registered Republican, although I have flipped to vote in certain Democratic primaries. But My political roots lay in the right. And what I'm trying to do is reach at least a few of those, quote, trolls or conservatives that like to poke holes in putting workers first. My point is really to make them think and just go, maybe the other side, maybe FDR has a point. Wow, I didn't know that he was for reforms to save this country from radicalism. I didn't know that. He might have been wrong, as I said, very harshly in recognizing Russia and increasing the trade between American firms and the Soviet Union, which, by the way, occurred during the Roaring '20s under Republican rule. We rightly didn't recognize Moscow, but we allowed American companies to invest in the Soviet Union to the point that they built them up. That predated Roosevelt, by the way. Coolidge and Hoover allowed that, and Harding. I want people to really just think, look, I have people attack me too. I had one fellow, not going to mention the screen name, you know who you are, who attacked me. He was very disappointed because I interpreted things in class spaces. Well, social class is real. And if you want to prevent a class-based revolution, you have to take a look at historically what has helped bridge extreme class cleavages and thereby take the wind out of the sails out of radicals. Because when everybody is doing well, society does well. When everybody is moving more or less in harmony, nothing's going to be perfect. It's not going to be utopia. I get it. But when we make an honest effort to improve things and use policies that have worked, you're going to get more people that believe in their government. You're going to get more people buying and selling goods and services. You're going to have people pulling themselves up by their bootstraps from the bottom because now they have the time and or the resources to pursue their business aspirations. Maybe they want to create a new podcast. Maybe they want to create a new podcast or product or service. Well, if you're working 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet, as is under the current shithole neoliberal Reagan economy, you're not going to have time to do that. You're not going to have time to develop that new entrepreneurial idea. This is the stuff you're not going to read in Ludwig von Mises or Friedrich Hayek or James M. Buchanan and other free market theorists. You're not going to read the reality on the ground of what how the everyday economy functions. They only tell one side of the story, but either leave the other side out, or they have class hatred themselves towards the lower classes, like Ludwig von Mises does. When you take a look at his letter to Ayn Rand in 1958, another class warrior and class hater. So when you look at that, and when you look at the solutions that you and I are propounding, that's going to help the economy as a whole. It's going to bring up national morale. It's going to make us a true superpower once again. A country that we can look at our children, and we both have children, and say, I am proud to be an American. And that's where I come from. I come from this nationalist conservative view, but what I consider myself is a true conservative. Because I want to conserve, to preserve the country, its best fundamentals. And the reason why I'm a nationalist and not a patriot is because patriots is just, okay, you wave the flag, rah, 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 America, love it or leave it. Nationalism, since is a healthy nationalism, a civic nationalism, is more when you have this desire, you have this deep connection with the country and its people, and you want to see all the people to succeed. When you see a homeless veteran or a homeless family, for example, that your heart breaks if it's through no fault of their own. And that even the addicted person who, with the closures due to neoliberal Reaganite shithole economic theory, the mental hospitals are closed and they're tossed out on the street. Your heart breaks for that. You consider that an open sore, a wound in this country. When you see the the opioid epidemics. You see the massive depressions in the industrial cities in this country, jobs going overseas. You see steel mills shuttered and then create casinos and shopping malls out of that. That is a nation, signs of a nation in decline. That is not a proud nation. That is a nation in decline. That is a nation collapsing. That is not industry, people, technology, that an ability a nation to defend itself, not only through having an adequate and all-powerful defense force, but a nation that is psychologically and socially and racially as much as possible unified. That is what informs my nationalism. It crosses class boundaries. It crosses the races, the genders, the sexual orientations, and whatnot. So, are you going to vote for me, Charles? No, I'm kidding.
Nevin, I'm so glad that you mentioned that. So May is Military Appreciation Month, and I shared a piece of content just today about that. And I know that there will be some kind of backlash because 100% there are people out there that view some of the things that happen here as wrong and evil, and this is a part of it. But it's our job to address those bad ideas and to fix them, because I love my country. Love it or leave it. I love it, so I can't leave it. I'm going to change it. I'm going to make it better. And because of that, I can say that if an American company opens up a tannery in Bangladesh and pays the people 5 cents an hour to work in unsafe conditions and poisons the water supply and leads to mass death and suffering over there so that the corporate executives over here can enrich their shareholders, that shit's wrong. Mm-hmm. And it's okay to say that that's wrong. And the people that have written the tax laws that make offshore profits be half as much as the ones that are made here, that's hurting the workers here. And that's wrong. And we have to be able to talk about those things. We have to be able to criticize bad ideas, whether or not they're American or not, because that's what we're supposed to be doing every single day, working to make this a more perfect union. It is the opening preamble to the Constitution that's our responsibility as Americans. And like I'm right there with you, and yeah, that's where I'll leave you today, Kevin. I'm right there with you, brother.
Yeah. Any closing comments before we go? I know I talked a lot. I'm sorry if it invaded your time, but this is important information. I know you know this, but it's important information to come out. Look, it's the audience's choice. If you want to agree with me even halfway, great, wonderful. We can talk offline. If you want to just hate me for my views and how they've evolved over the years, I mean, that's your right too. It's a free country. Don't be an asshole about it online. I'm fine with disagreement. Just don't be an asshole and don't be snarky and don't be a troll. That's all I ask. Otherwise, I'm either going to ignore you, block you, or just be an asshole myself, or bury you with whatever facts I have on my side to counter your point of view. So, look, this is important information. I'm glad you allowed me to have this. It's more of a discussion than an interview. Might have seemed one-sided. I'm sorry again, but...
You can apologize. You're good.
Yeah, it's just something I feel very strongly about, and it breaks my heart that there are a lot of people that just don't see it, and it's really unfortunate. But I think it's our job to really provide people with another point of view through a unique lens. And I think we do that.
I think for me, the biggest thing that I want in a leader is the ability to have empathy for people, because I think to know all is to forgive all. It's a St. Augustine quote, and it doesn't mean that it's okay and it's acceptable. It means that you understand. And when you understand, there's a better opportunity to see where that person's coming from and to work together with them, because the Bible told me that just as iron sharpens iron, so does one man sharpen another. And that's all that I'm trying to do, is just trying to sharpen myself every single day. And Nevin, I appreciate the opportunity to come talk with you sometimes on my page. I am not kind to trolls that show up. I almost changed my little tagline the other day to say, like, abandon all hope, trolls who enter here. Because if you walk into my union hall and you start talking shit about unions, it's not going to be a kind response. So if that's your expectation, it's not going to happen. And yeah, just appreciate everything you're doing, brother.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you. I have a feeling I'd probably be more or less welcome in your union hall. I mean,
brother.
To be honest, and I wanted to read one more quote. You mentioned empathy by Franklin Roosevelt, and we'll close out. Radio address, and I am a union brother too, GSA, Government Supervisors of America. In a radio address, FDR stated on October 13th, 1940, and I'll leave all of you with this thought. Human kindness has never weakened the stamina or softened the fiber of a free people. A nation does not have to be cruel in order to be tough. The vigorous expression of our American community spirit is truly important. The ancient injunction to love thy neighbor as thyself is still the force that animates our faith, a faith that we are determined shall live long and conquer in a world poisoned by hatred, a faith that we are determined shall live and conquer in a world poisoned by hatred and ravaged by war.
Amen.
There you go. I'm just going to close out with that on my end. And I want to thank you so much for Charles for coming on the show, for having this discussion with me. And I look forward to having you again. Hopefully we'll talk about some more union victories and for the workers of America, the middle class, and the independent patriotic business people out there. That's what we represent here at the Politically Homeless podcast. And I want to thank you all. God bless America. God bless what you're doing, Charles, and putting workers first in the CWA. And enjoy your weekend, everybody. Brought to you not by Wall Street, but by unions and workers that have died and bled to bring reasonable work hours and the weekends to us. Thank you all. God bless. And God bless America.